election, Labour's sleaze problem won't go away as a greedy and entitled Prime Minister gets tetchy with the media when it dares to quiz him about governmental arrangements. In the midst of this row, the unrepentant Lady Starmer yesterday wore another lone freebie frock to attend the Labour Party conference. And it then emerged that the Prime Minister had been using Lord Alley's £18 million Covent Garden apartment during the election campaign. The Telegraph reported that it understood that the luxury penthouse was being used for strategy meetings and fundraising dinners. However, on Radio 4 this morning, the Prime Minister sank to a new level. He used his son as a human shield. He has defended the use of the apartment on the grounds that his son needed somewhere quiet to study for his GCSEs. Well, I know the Bible says the sins of the father will be visited upon the son, but I didn't think it would ever be the other way round. But upon closer inspection of Starmer's declaration concerning the free use of the apartment, which cost £20,400, something doesn't quite fit. Starmer declared his use of the flat from the 29th of May 2024 to the 13th of July 2024. But GCSEs started on the 9th of May and ended on the 19th of June. In other words, the allegedly essential use of the apartment began weeks after GCSEs started and ended nearly a month after GCSEs had finished. So if the apartment were used for his son's GCSEs, what was going on in the apartment for the 3 weeks after they had ended? Starmer's efforts to cover up over Donorgate mean he will not recover from it. He has used the classic politician's defence. I did nothing wrong. It was within the rules. Everyone does it. But now I won't do it again. He and other ministers said they would no longer take freebie clothing now they're in office, especially after the hostility from Labour backbenchers and members. But then yesterday, we saw another freebie on display from Lady Starmer in an entitled, if not arrogant, approach to the scandal. Or perhaps the masters just want to rub our noses in their overweening superiority as she wore another dress that was not her own. And now, when it emerges he's been using Lord Alley's apartment, his dishonesty with the public, as was shown with Christopher Hope earlier today.
Well, all that happened is I wanted somewhere safe and quiet for my son to do his GCSE preparation. I needed it to be secure because of the situation we were in. Simply somebody saying, if you want somewhere quiet for your son to study whilst he's doing your GCSE, you can use this place here.
So not only has the Reverend Starmer decided rather ungallantly to throw his son under the bus, he's also decided to be economical with the truth, as the dates do not match the GCSE timetable. There really is no recovery from this. Donorgate will haunt him as much as sausages will for the rest of his time in office. As always, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. I'm very pleased to be joined now by the broadcast journalist Matthew Stadlen, as well as my panel, former Conservative Cabinet Minister John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. Matthew, people need to get their facts right. Dare I say it, though I supported him, this is beginning to sound very like Boris Johnson, that somebody says something went wrong, you say, no, it didn't, it's all fine. Then they find another detail and you say, well, perhaps that happened. And then you give an explanation that doesn't quite add up. And this is exactly what Starmer's done. But he was so high and mighty when it was Boris.
Well, two questions. One, why did you support Boris Johnson?
I supported Boris Johnson because I thought that what he had done was not serious and wasn't a major problem, and that he said things in good faith. But here we're having somebody who always thought that any Tory doing anything like this was shameful, and now he's doing more and worse himself, particularly as there's now an allegation in the Telegraph, but it's also been on Guido, that he was using Lord Alley's flat to make statements during COVID lockdowns.
So Boris Johnson, as was found by a committee of your fellow parliamentarians, lied to Parliament, deliberately misled Parliament. But I don't want to indulge in too much whataboutery, because it's absolutely right that this government is held to account. What is it exactly that you think that Keir Starmer has done wrong?
He has taken excessive hospitality and support for things that most people would expect somebody to pay for themselves. So the free dresses for his wives, most men wouldn't want other men paying for their wives' dresses. And actually, on this housing, saying it was for a purpose that the facts don't match, it's the cover-up that seems to me to be much worse than borrowing a flat from a donor.
But covering up what? as you say.
Well, I don't know.
You say, he was accepting this flat, or the use of the flat. He's declared that, and I think we need to be very careful, because in your opening, in your monologue, you talked about the dodginess of this.
Yeah, it is dodgy, because he says
it's not dodgy. Dodgy implies, I think, at least to some extent, implies criminality or corruption.
No, I don't think it implies criminality.
There's no suggestion of any of those things, is there?
It doesn't imply criminality, but it is dodgy, because he said he needed it for his son's GCSEs, but he moved the family in the middle of the GCSEs and then stayed for the 3 weeks after they'd ended. This was just not true.
Well, I'm not Keir Starmer. I'm certainly not his spokesman. I've never been asked to be his spokesman. I broadly supported his efforts to get into number 10, and I can certainly see that some of the optics here are far from ideal. But we've got to be careful, again, before we start accusing people of being dodgy. Now, it may well be the case that his primary need for that flat, as he saw it, was for his son to be able to do their GCSEs. There may have been other uses as well, and I'm sure my colleagues in the world of journalism will follow up on that. But this is a programme that is called, quite literally, isn't it, The State of the Nation. And what I find a shame is that we are talking about these issues at all, not because they're not legitimate to be asked about, but I worry that journalists find these as easy goals to score, because this, don't forget, we should remind the viewers, Jacob, this is all openly available to everyone at home because they have been declared. We are on a precipice. The state of this nation, thanks in part to 14 years of Tory rule, this nation stands on a precipice, and I don't mean this as a rhetorical device. We have an NHS in crisis. We have social care in crisis. Our armed forces, dare I say it, are in crisis. Our transport system is in relative crisis. There is a cost of living crisis still, and we are talking about things that have been openly declared.
And in a cost of living crisis, we have a Prime Minister who takes £107,000 worth of freebies.
I see the optics are not good. I agree with that.
So the thing that concerns me most about this is the hypocrisy. That Starmer was so pious about all of this, and then his snout is in the trough more than anybody else. 2.5 times more freebies for Starmer than any other Member of Parliament.
He made an error of judgment, and he's made it quite clear he won't do it again. He was in opposition, i.e. not in the equivalent position of power he now finds himself in. I tend to agree with the Right Honourable Matthew on the other side of the desk in terms of let's get our priorities right here. And I've got to check GBNews on its journalism. In fact, Victoria Starmer, in, I thought, a stunning red dress worth over £1,000, lest anyone's thinking of buying it at home, was lent to her by a Canadian British designer.
But it was therefore free.
But it was totally disingenuous to suggest, because we know that she did get funding for her dresses from Lord Ali, and you said in your monologue, other men buying her dresses. In the same breath, you said she was wearing a free dress. That was from a female designer, and it was loaned. It was showing off the best of British.
Once again, she was taking a freebie.
She was showing off the best of British. You should admire that. You believe in free market forces.
I just think it's so arrogant in the midst of this sort of a row to carry on taking freebies when all the other the cabinet ministers have said they won't take free dresses anymore.
A loan that showed off a British label.
John, the hypocrisy of this is the problem, isn't it?
Well, of course it is. It is a problem that they created because they were remorseless in picking over every little peccadillo of Conservative ministers, some genuine, some not. And they were never forgiving, and they never thought that anything was reasonable. And now we find that they've been doing the same or worse on a huge scale that a lot of Conservatives wouldn't have dreamt of doing. And you have to challenge their judgment. I mean, these things may all have been within the rules, but they were a gross political misjudgment, which is why they've had 2 weeks of news bulletins about practically nothing else.
From the predominantly right-wing press. Come on, this is on the bone for you guys.
This is Labour briefings of the press. We don't have that power on the Conservative side, I can assure you.
I genuine sympathy.
The conference was very hostile on all this. And so then, instead of saying, no, we're absolutely sure what we did was right morally as well as within the law, and we're going to carry on doing it, they then say they're going to dump a lot of it. So that looks extremely guilty. So then they do make themselves look hypocritical.
Don't you have a degree of sympathy with Starmer? We know he's been very wary of the impact on his 2 youngish adolescent children, my boy, my girl, we don't even get to know their names, and suddenly the juggernaut of the press, he doesn't know when the election's going to be called, he hits the panic button, and incidentally, if you're wondering what happens after the GCSEs,
I think the press doesn't do that. I had the juggernaut of the press when I was challenging John Major when I had young children at home, and the press were extremely good with the children. They didn't go anywhere near them.
Could I just widen this out very, very briefly, if I may? Are you two gentlemen who have been MPs, and you said off air you've never accepted a sort of hospitality-type gift, that sort of freebie, and good for you for that, although it's also true that you're a man of impressive means, I think. But are you suggesting that MPs should get no gifts whatsoever? I rather like that idea myself, but let's make sure that it is cross-party.
I think MPs should be very careful about the hospitality that they accept.
The problem with gifts, if I may say, is, and I've defended Starmer on the basis that he has declared these things, the problem with gifts is that even if you declare things, and this isn't just about Starmer, this is about all 650 MPs in the House of Commons, the problem is that just because you've declared it doesn't mean that you are immune then to be influenced by the... not just criticism, but you're not immune, I don't think, from influence from the donor. Well, so just because you've declared it doesn't mean Matthew, you might not be influenced.
Well, that's the point I was making. Yeah. It can be a big moral and political misjudgment, even if it's perfectly legal.
That is
some hospitality is fine. I mean, if you are the Prime Minister or the Culture Secretary, and one of our nations or countries is playing a very important game and you're invited as an official guest, then of course you should go.
If you're a local
what you
MP,
shouldn't do is say, I've got a pet team I want to watch as regularly as possible, and will somebody please fund me for doing that? No, that's personal leisure. You pay
and we've ended
yourself.
On a wonderful degree of agreement that even if it's declared, there's still an intention. Where there's a tip, there's a tap.